Hello, Joe here with gardenofluma.com. I am in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and it is chilly this morning. It's been chilly the last couple nights, in the 30s. It's mid-November, and I haven't been prepared for this cold weather yet. Usually I don't start like frost protecting and things like that till later in November, early December, so this has kind of snuck up on me. And so I didn't do anything with like any of my tropical fruit trees or anything to protect them or move them indoors or anything like I typically do on cold nights like this. So let's talk a little bit about growing tropical fruit trees or subtropical fruit trees in marginal climates where you do get these cold snaps. So we're in zone 9B, and one thing I highly recommend is get familiar with your growing zone. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll put a link down below for the US Hardiness zone map, and all you really do is plug in your zip code and then it'll tell you like what zone you're in. So zone 9B is a marginal climate for tropical fruit trees because we do dip below freezing temps. We can get down into the 20s. So if you're in zone 9, it goes by the low temps, the cold temps. So we range into the mid to upper 20s we can get at times here. And so we do average a few of those nights a year typically. So check out your zone. If you're in zone 8 or 9, here's a tip for you: grow tropical fruit trees in containers. So I do some of that as well. Some of my more sensitive tropical fruit trees I keep in containers. That way you can move them around the yard, or you can move them indoors for the winter if you need to, or on those cold nights. So things like, I have soursop right now that I'll show you here in a minute, and the effects of cold on that tree. It does not like to get cold at all. And so I bring that tree in pretty much every night below 40 degrees typically when I'm prepared for it. Another strategy people talk about with helping keeping your fruit trees from freezing is to water them heavily like the night you know it's going to get cold. And so what I would say to this is know your tropical fruit trees first before you do this, because some fruit trees do not like that cold, wet soil. That will cause root rot. So like papaya trees, banana trees, and nonas, you know, if you're soaking those trees and they're getting cold and wet, you know, that wet feet, they are gonna rot. So be careful with that. You know, that does work for some trees, but not all trees. Another strategy that I utilize is using liquid seaweed. And so there's a lot of research on liquid seaweed that it does help with cold protection to a few degrees. And so I'm not going to get into like all the scientific details of that. I mean, you can research that or read up on that, but I use that as a foliar as well as just like an in-ground fertilizer. So I'll put a link down below to the product that I use and recommend, so check that out as well. Another strategy that you guys can utilize to help is know your microclimates in your yard. So there are certain spots in your yard that are going to get colder than others. Cold air sinks, so those low points in your yard, you know, watch out for those. Those areas that are open and you're going to get a lot of wind, that wind damage does a lot more than the cold temps. So be aware of that. And I'll show you an example in my yard of a good microclimate. So when you're planting, you know, think about those types of things, like plant it next to something that's going to help protect the tree. Plant it under eaves of your house or next to your house for that extra protection and warmth in the winter. I know some people worry about planting close to the house, but for tropical fruit trees, you know, if you're in a marginal climate, that kind of keeps the trees in check. Like here in Phoenix, Arizona, I don't drive around town and see like 30, 40-foot mango trees growing all over here. So the elements tend to keep those types of trees in check, and they don't get very large here. Lastly, utilize some sort of frost protection structure if you're planting in the ground. And I'm gonna link to a good video down below that's really benefited me with that. And so that's one thing I typically do, is build like those frost structures for some of my in-ground trees, and that can be really helpful as well. All right, let's take a look at things in the yard here, and some things that you need to be concerned about and other things that you don't. All right, so here's my sugar apple tree, and I wanted to show you something here. So some of these leaves you can see are kind of beat up here, and this has been going on before we had the cold snaps for the last couple weeks. And so this is natural here. So some of these annonas are semi-deciduous, so they slowly lose their leaves throughout the winter. So when you see this on some of your tropical fruit trees, don't be alarmed. It's more concerning if they just all drop at one time. That is definitely a cause for concern. But for these sugar apple trees, some of the annonas, the adamoyas, they tend to slowly drop their leaves throughout the winter. So this is normal. When you start seeing this, definitely slow down on the watering, because they do not like to sit in cold, wet soil. So I have an adamoya tree in the ground that I don't even hardly water at all in the winter. Since this guy's in a container here, this sugar apple, you know, I'll water it periodically throughout the winter, but for the most part, I keep it fairly on the dry side, just because it does pretty much go dormant throughout the winter, almost like a stone fruit tree. But it will hold a lot of the leaves throughout the winter. It just slowly drops them. So once you get the new growth flush in spring, that'll be about the point where you're losing kind of the last of the leaves on these types of trees. All right, here's my soursop, which is probably my most sensitive tree in my yard here. And you can see definitely some cold damage on this over the last few cold nights that we've had, and the cold snap we had last week. Whenever you see black on the leaves like that, kind of see it throughout the leaves, that is definitely a cause for concern. That is cold damage. And so this guy should have been bringing in, but I wasn't prepared and I didn't realize we were going to get this cold. So these leaves have definitely been damaged from the cold. And so anytime you see black leaves, black branches, you know that's a cause for concern. Okay, I wanted to show you this mango seedling here. So I've planted this mango seedling about 1.5 years ago. So it's been through one winter already, and I never protected this tree. Mangoes are definitely cold sensitive trees. I have one mango tree in a container that I bring indoors on cold nights, and then 3 others in the ground that I use a frost structure to protect those trees. And I even use like heaters and stuff when it gets really cold for those trees. But this one was more experimental, and I left this guy unprotected just to see what would happen. And as you can see, I mean, this thing's really healthy and green. And so if you look up above, as you can see, it's really dense foliage here. There are 2 large trees above it. There's foliage all around here. There's a wall. And so I have blackberry plants next to it. So as you can see, the microclimate really protects this tree, or this seedling here. And so if you have a good microclimate, planting next to other trees, other plants, walls, houses, things that'll help keep it just a few degrees warmer in the winter, it can make all the difference. All right, lastly, I do protect a lot of my tropical fruit trees that are out here in the yard that I have planted in the ground. Things like my mango trees, my sapodillas, my annonas that I do have planted out in the ground. And so one of the strategies I use, I'm gonna link down below to the video that I utilize. So a couple local gardeners, a tropical fruit tree owner, Seamus O'Leary's tropical fruit trees. They've been inspirational to me in getting me growing tropical fruit trees, subtropical fruit trees and things. So check out the video that he does with Jake Mace. They talk about how to protect tropical fruit trees and how to build a structure to protect your tropical fruit trees, which is just awesome. And that's a strategy I utilize. And so I will link to that video down below. And so that'll give you a strategy on how to build a structure to protect those trees in the winter and what to do there. Check out gardenofluma.com for more tips and ideas on how to grow fruit trees in an urban backyard garden, especially for hot, dry climates. Thanks for watching.